Resourceful Designer, Episode 62, How to Use a Virtual Assistant for Your Graphic Design Business.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer Podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He never butters his bread unless it's toasted. Mark Devote.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy that you've joined me today as we discuss running our graphic design businesses. Now, I've got a great topic for you today about using virtual assistants. And I have to tell you, since I hired my own virtual assistant, it has taken a lot of the burden of running my own graphic design business off of my shoulders and has freed up so much time to do the stuff that actually helps bring in an income. And I thought it would be a great topic to share with you. But before we get to that, I want to share a little bit of a frustration I've had this past week. There was a client that I designed a website for. This is going back a couple of years. I designed their website. And they run a retail store in my local town here. And when we built the website, I suggested to them that they have some sort of emailing list so they can send out a newsletter to their clients and people that sign up, just informing them of what sort of specials they have or when new merchandise comes in. And anyways, I set the whole thing up, but in all this time, the client never set anything up. And over the years, I've questioned them over and over. Have you set anything up? Do you need help doing this? Because I offered to help them, but they didn't want to pay. When I gave them a price to set everything up, they just thought, well, we don't want to pay to do that. And they've never done anything. Well, I was talking to the client this week, and he said that every time the email comes in, all it is it just emails them the email address. There's no connection to any database or anything. It's just he gets an email at any time somebody requests to sign up to the email list. And he told me he's collected, because all he does is he takes the email and he's putting it into an Excel spreadsheet. He's collected over 2,000 email addresses over the past couple of years of people that have requested to be on their mailing list. And he has never sent a single thing out to them. And I just keep scratching my head and going, like, how can you let this go? And some clients, it doesn't matter how much you talk to them, they'll just never understand that this is a potential gold mine for his business. These are people that said, yes, we want to know about your business. We want to know what products you have. We want to know when you get new merchandise in. We want to know when you have sales. And yet he's not informing them. And even though I keep offering over and over, says, if you don't have the time, I can do this. I can set everything up for you. They keep looking at my price and going, well, I don't know if it's worth the money. And in my mind, all it would take is one or two of these 2,000 people to convert into a sale, and they would have probably covered my cost. But some clients, no matter how much you tell them, it just doesn't sink in. And that's one of the frustrations I've had this week. I've gone back and forth with this client, especially now. I never knew how many people had actually signed up, but when he tells me that he has over 2,000 people on this list and he's never sent them even a thank you for signing up email, it's just very, very frustrating. But other than that, things are going well, and I hope your graphic design business is growing and prospering as well. Now, before I get to today's topic, I want to share a tip of the week with you. And this week's tip comes from something I've seen from time to time when I'm looking at other people's websites. Especially, as I mentioned in the past, whenever a graphic designer contacts me or I come across a graphic designer, I always go check out their website. Not just them, but a lot of people. I mean, being a web designer, I love looking at websites. And one thing that frustrates me is when you go to a website and it says it's either coming soon or under construction, or maybe it's just shut down for maintenance, and there's no other information on the page. Now, I've mentioned before, my website has been, quote unquote, coming soon for several years now. I've just never taken the time because I haven't really needed my website. I'm busy enough without my website that I've never bothered to take the time to build it. Well, that's not true. I've started building it many times over the years. But when you're a web designer, you guys know how it is. You come up with some great ideas, or you see some neat new trick that somebody came up with and you say, I got to try that. But every time you start, then there's something new. And I don't know how many times I've changed my in development website just because I discovered some new trick or some new innovation or some new plugin and I wanted to try something out, and it just never ended up getting launched. Now, one of these days I will eventually launch it, But as I said, my business is running strong even without the website. Yes, I know I would be getting more clients with, but I'm at the point right now that even if I got more clients, I don't know if I could take on the work. But with that said, my coming soon page does give a brief description of my business as well as my phone number and my email address to contact me if they need to hire me. And I know that that works because over the years, it's a special email. It's not my regular email address. I put a different email address on that page. And I've gotten contacted through that email many, many times. And I've gained a lot of new clients through that email, even though there was no website there. So what I'm saying is I'm frustrated whenever I go to a website and I see a coming soon or under construction or even just closed for temporary maintenance page, and there's no contact information there. It is so easy, whether it's your own website or if you're doing something for a client's website and you put the site under construction. I've got a plugin whenever I'm working, say, on a WordPress website. I install on all my clients' website. There's a plugin, I think it's just called Coming Soon. And I turn that on. Whenever I'm working on their website, I will turn it on, and I've got an under maintenance page. But on that page, I have all my clients' contact information there. So if somebody happens to go visit the website while it's under construction, they still have a brief description of the company, and they have their phone numbers and the email addresses to get a hold of them. Because it's nothing more frustrating than going to a page and just saying, oh, well, the website's not here, check back later, and not have any other information. So that's my tip this week instead of a resource is just if you are building websites, either your own website or client websites, and you do put up a coming soon, under construction, undergoing maintenance, or whatever reason that you take the website down and there's just a blank page there, make sure you include a description of what the business is and contact information for the business so that if anybody stumbles upon the website for whatever reason, they're not just left in the dark and leave. So that's this week's tip of the week. And now on to our main topic, how to use a virtual assistant for your graphic design business. Now, if you remember back in episode 45 of the podcast, I talked about how it's okay for a graphic designer to ask for help. After all, there's only so many minutes in a day. And once those minutes are gone, they're gone. There's no getting them back. So you have to use them as wisely as you can. Now, in episode 45, which I do recommend if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it. You can find it at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 45. In that episode, I covered things like maybe finding help with your house and your yard work so that you have more time to devote to your graphic design business and to your family. I'm in the process right now where the winters here in Canada or in Ontario get pretty bad. And I have a snowblower. I bought the snowblower. When we built this house 11 years ago, I bought this secondhand snowblower from somebody, and I've been using it for 11 years. Well, it's gotten to the point where it's not nearly enough for what I need. It doesn't work very well, and it's not worth investing the money to fix it. But to buy a new snowblower for what I need for the size of my driveway, it would cost me, close to $1,500, if not $2,000. And I'm at the point, and my wife and I have discussed this, instead of investing $1,500 into a new snowblower, I might as well just hire somebody to come and clean my driveway for me. Because the thing with the driveway is, unlike, I love mowing my lawn, but mowing my lawn, I can do it on my schedule. The driveway, whenever snow falls and we can't get in and out of the driveway, I have no choice but to go out and do it. And sometimes that's in the middle of the business day and it takes time away from my business. So why not hire somebody to do that sort of thing? So I talked about all that in episode 45. It's okay to ask for help for business stuff and around the house. And in that episode, I talk about hiring people to take on the mundane or the non-design tasks for your business. You simply pay them a small fee and then use the time that you save for designing and to earn a larger fee. If you haven't already listened to that episode, or if you think you need a refresher, you should go back and listen to it. But today, what I want to talk to you is about one aspect of hiring help, and that's a virtual assistant, often referred to as a VA. Now, what is a virtual assistant? Well, simply put, it's someone that assists you from a remote location. That's it. They could be at another business. They may be working from their home. It could be somebody next door, or it could be somebody halfway around the world. The thing is, they're working remotely. So in essence, they work with you virtually. They're not in your home. They're not at your business. Now, if you are running your own business and you've ever hired maybe another designer, perhaps a coder, a web developer. Maybe you've hired a copywriter, or maybe even an illustrator. Any other such person, if you have hired somebody like that, then you have in effect hired a virtual assistant. Although we don't usually refer to these people as such. Most of the time, they're just contractors, or we hired an illustrator or hired a web developer. Now, these people are great, and they are very fundamental to building a solid foundation for your quote unquote design team. But these are not the people I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about the web developers and the coders, copywriters, illustrators, or even other designers that you may hire. What I'm talking about when I say virtual assistant is the people who may not be in the design space. Instead, they help you with all those mundane tasks of running a business so that you can free up your time. Now, you may be thinking, well, what can I use a virtual assistant for? I want you to think of your typical week and all the small tasks that you do for your business. They all fall under that umbrella of running your graphic design business, but may not actually be part of designing. Many of those tasks could be delegated to someone else. Let me give you some examples. Some tasks that are design related may not be the best thing for you to do, and they could be delegated. Stuff like updating WordPress plugins. If you offer maintenance to your web clients, well, part of that maintenance is updating plugins. And we all know that there's a lot of plugins on a website, which you should have as little as possible, but even just WordPress itself, the theme, the plugins, they all need to be updated on a regular basis in order to keep the site secure. Now, that's a job that if you were going to keep on top of things, you would be visiting the websites almost on a daily basis in order to update the plugins. So that's something that you can hire somebody else to do so you don't have to do it. Another thing is online research. Now, if you do have your own design blog or something like that, you can actually hire somebody to do some research for your material, for the articles. Now, if you don't, another thing you might want to hire somebody to research is during the discovery stage of dealing with a new client. Say you take on a new client and they manufacture some product. Just for the fun of it, let's say that your client manufactures a new version of a garden trowel for digging and weeding and doing stuff in the garden. Well, you might want to look at what sort of competition, who else is out there, what is the competition doing? Well, instead of you searching for all this stuff and spending your valuable time that you could be charging a client 50, 75, 100, 200, whatever your rate is, you can be charging them a lot of money. Instead, you can hire somebody and pay them $10, $15, $20 an hour to do that research for you, gather it all up, and then send it to you for you to easily look over in a short period of time. You get all the things. Here's all the information. Here are the various competition and their products and how they package them and how they look and so forth. So during that discovery stage where a lot of research has to be done, that is something that a virtual assistant can do for you. Another good reason would be to have somebody to test websites for you. If you build websites for a living, you know that there's a lot of links and a lot of things that can go wrong. Now, chances are if you're really good, you're testing these as you go. But sometimes it's a good idea to get a third party to look at them before you show them to the client. And you can hire somebody on a whatever per website basis and say, I'll pay you $5, I'll pay you $10 just to look at this website. Go through the website and let me know if you see anything wrong. Are there any broken links? Is there anything that's confusing? Is there anything that you think, not necessarily design-wise, but maybe there's a page that's so long and they say, well, maybe there should be some, back to the top type buttons or whatever. And you get their opinion. And if it's somebody that you trust and they do this on a regular basis for you, they will start to know what you do and how you work and to help you out. And it could be a really big asset to have somebody look over your work before giving it to your client. Another thing is simply writing or editing or proofreading. If you have to do any copywriting or if you even copying and pasting or doing all sorts of stuff, it's always a good idea to have this stuff looked over. Now, normally this is the client's job, but a lot of times you might want to have somebody look it over yourself. So you can hire somebody to either write the copy if you want to hire a copywriter or something. You can hire somebody to edit some stuff or simply to proofread to make sure everything reads and there's no spelling mistakes or grammatical errors or anything like that. So you can hire somebody to do that. There's also translation services. Like in my case, I live in Eastern Ontario. I'm not far from the Quebec border. And in Quebec, if I have any clients there, any work they do has to be in both English and French. Actually, sorry, it has to be in French. If they want it in English, it also has to be in French. So most clients will do it in bilingual English and French. Well, I speak French, but I'm not good enough to translate and that. So if somebody gives me something in English and they want it for Quebec market, I would hire somebody to translate it into French. And that could be a virtual assistant that does that for a living. Now, other things you can use is to just text entry. Like say the client gives you an old book that they want to maybe republish. This happened to me a few years ago where a client found this old book that one of their, I think it was a grandfather or grandmother had published, and they had a copy and they wanted to republish it. And that book needed to be retyped out or actually scanned in and using optical character recognition software, re-entered it as text. And what I did was I hired somebody that would do that and then go through the text to kind of clean up, because OCR software is not always the best. It does make mistakes. So somebody had to go through, and I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to spend my time reading through this document to make sure there was no errors. So I hired somebody to do that. Now, another thing you can do, I talked earlier about how you can hire illustrators and web developers and other designers and copywriters. Well, when you're doing all of that stuff and you're managing all these people, in essence, you are kind of acting like an art director. Now, it may be not to the full extent of an art director in an agency, but you do have to manage all these people. And you could hire a virtual assistant just to be a project manager. If you work like this a lot, if you often have all these other team members working with you, you can actually hire a virtual assistant, and her job or his job would simply be to keep track of everything, make sure that everything is being worked on schedule, that nothing is being left out, and that everything comes back to you in the proper order for you to manage the project and get it out to the client. So instead of you keeping on top of everybody and making sure everybody's doing their job, you can hire somebody to do that. So those are some of the things you can do with a virtual assistant design-wise. Now, with your business, there's invoicing and bookkeeping. I mean, yeah, it's simple to do, especially with some of the software. Like I use Billings, and then there's stuff like FreshBooks out there and other software for invoicing and bookkeeping. But maybe that's not something you like to do. You just want to do the designing. Well, you can hire somebody, and they don't have to be local. They could be anywhere in the world as long as they know your system and the way your environment, where taxes and how all that stuff works. They can take care of your invoicing and bookkeeping for you. You can also get somebody, if you're looking for work and you want to do cold calling, and maybe you don't feel comfortable, well, maybe you can hire somebody to call different companies to see if they're looking for design work. And this person can act as if they work for your company and just inquire, put feelers out to see if they are looking for design work. And if somebody is, then you can call them back. And that way you don't have to deal with all the people who are not interested. You can hire somebody to do that. If you are chasing payments from clients because they're not paying you on time, you can hire somebody to follow up and to keep on top of that so you don't have to worry about it. Or simply just organizing client meetings. You can keep track of your schedule or give your schedule to a virtual assistant, and they can manage meetings and set things up with other clients and that, so that you don't have to do that. And then they just basically tell you when the meeting is and you show up. Now, as far as marketing stuff goes, a virtual assistant can be really good for managing social media for both you and your clients. Say you want to build your business using social media, but you don't have the time to do everything and constantly keep on top of it. Well, you can hire a virtual assistant that would manage your social media for you. Or you can offer that as a service to your clients, that you can manage their social media, and when they sign on, you pass it on to a virtual assistant and let them worry about it while you keep on designing. So it could be another part of your business that you offer, a service that you offer, but you have somebody else taking care of it for you. Same thing with email or feedback forms. Say you have a website and people contact you for work, and they're constantly sending you stuff in, and then you have to take the time to see whether or not it's worth you replying, or, courtesy is that you do reply. But say you're at a level where you don't take on any job that's under $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. Well, any inquiry that comes in, if somebody says, I need some business cards made up, well, that might not be the type of job you want to take. Well, instead of you getting that email and having to type up a reply saying, thank you very much, but we don't do this sort of thing, that you can have a virtual assistant get all these emails, have your email come in, and they only forward the pertinent ones onto you. Anything that doesn't fall in that category, they can reply with a courtesy email on your behalf, and you never have to see it. So those are some tasks that you could hire a virtual assistant for. Now, you may be wondering, well, Mark, you mentioned that you have a virtual assistant. What does your virtual assistant do for you? Well, I hired a woman. This is going back almost a year ago. I worked for the better part of my business without, but over the last year, I hired a virtual assistant, and I can tell you that it was really, really been a big help. Now, what she does for me is she manages all the updates, plugins, the themes, and WordPress updates for all my client websites for me. So I've set her up using iThemes Sync, which is a great software for keeping track and managing multiple websites and updates and all that. If you want more information, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iThemes and look up Sync, their program for managing multiple websites. They're the same company that make Backup Buddy that I recommend for backing up WordPress websites. Well, she does that for me on a regular basis. She goes in and looks, and it'll list every website that's managed through Sync, and it'll say that either WordPress needs updating, the theme needs updating, or here's a list of the plugins that needs updating, and she can do it from there. She can update everything without having to visit each and every website. So instead of me having to do this on a regular basis, she goes in, updates all the websites, double checks that all the websites are working properly after all the updates, because just in case an update breaks something, and that's it. And she sends me a bill once per month, and I don't have to worry about updating, because that's one of the services I offer my clients, is that the website maintenance package is keeping track of all this stuff, but I don't have to. My virtual assistant does it. The other thing she does is she does research for me. I mentioned discovery. She does that for certain clients for me. She also does website testing when I need to. And she also does research for my blog and podcast, this podcast itself. Sometimes when I have a topic idea and I want to kind of get more information about it before I talk about it, or whenever I have an idea for the blog, which I haven't put out in a while, but when I get an idea, she will research some stuff for me. I'll give her some guidelines and say, this is what I want you to look for. And she will go out and do that. Recently, I had her go through, I wanted to find every graphic design school in Ontario, in my province, and get the teacher or whoever was in charge of the program. I wanted their email and their phone number and the name of the program and the name of the school. So I had her do that, and she gathered all that information for me. And then I got that information, and then I was able to contact those people and just let them know about the podcast, because I wanted to let some local people know about this podcast just in case it was something that their students might be interested in. So those are the things that my virtual assistant helps me with. Other things that I have used VAs before are database entry. I've had clients where there's just been a lot of stuff that enter, and I won't do that stuff myself. I'll hire somebody to do it. I've mentioned before in the podcast how I've hired students, which can also be considered virtual assistants, for photo manipulation. I had a catalog to do, and I need every image on a white background. And there was, I forget, a couple of hundred photos, and every one had to be kind of close cropped so that the image would be on a perfectly white background. So I've hired people to do that. I've hired people just to proofread stuff before. So they're all different tasks. And sometimes you can find one virtual assistant to do a bunch of different things. And sometimes you might have to hire a bunch of different virtual assistants to do different parts, because some of them, like my virtual assistant that I use, she can manage the research. She can do the WordPress updates and all that stuff. But she couldn't have done the photo manipulation because she's not that proficient in Photoshop. So in that case, I got somebody else to do it. So sometimes you'll hire a VA for certain small tasks or one-off things. And then other times you might hire a virtual assistant to do stuff on a regular basis for you. But that's what I use mine for. Now, you may be thinking that, oh, that sounds great, Mark, but I really can't afford a virtual assistant. I'm just starting off, or, times are tough and I don't have a lot of money, and it just doesn't sound like a good idea. Well, you know what? That is a valid concern. But you got to look at it this way. I said it at the beginning. Time is finite. You only have so many minutes in a day, and you need to use them wisely. Now, remember that when it comes to your business, only you can really make your business grow. And you are much better off paying someone to do the simple tasks, the stuff that takes time away from you growing your business, and instead use that time to do the stuff that grows your business, whether that's attending networking events, going to meet with clients, or simply working on your own promotional materials. Imagine what you can do in a week if you had a spare hour, 2, 3, 4 hours extra during a week that you can devote to stuff to grow your business. Imagine how you can do. Would your business grow? Would it flourish in that sense? And don't forget that this stuff, growing your business, you should be paying a virtual assistant a fraction of what you're making, so that 1 hour of your time when you make money, 1 hour should pay for several hours of your virtual assistant, is what I'm talking. So as long as you use the time wisely. Now, I'm not saying give the task to your virtual assistant and then go watch TV. That's not using it wisely. But if you take that time and devote it back to your business, put it back into your business, it will help grow your business. And I think that's something worth thinking about. Now, I can tell you that I know a bunch of people that have hired virtual assistants, both graphic design people and other people as well. And I have never heard anyone who has hired a virtual assistant say that it was a mistake to do so. Now, they have said that maybe the person they hired didn't work out, or they had to go through several people before they found the right person. But the position itself of having a virtual assistant was never the mistake. In fact, most people that I hear from say that afterwards, once they get doing it, they wish they had done it sooner. And I can vouch for that. Since I've had my virtual assistant, I can tell you that I will probably never go back to not having one. If for some reason she has to stop working for me, I will immediately find somebody else to take those tasks, because it's things that I don't want to do. And the amount that I pay her is so small compared to everything else that I could be making with that time that it is well worth the price. Now, the other thing is, sometimes you might say, well, there's really nothing I want to give to them or to a virtual assistant. I like doing everything. Well, even if there's tasks that you like to do, sometimes it's still worth delegating them to somebody else. Just look at this. I do this podcast. I do this during my work hours. So as I'm talking to you right now, I could be designing something for a client. I could be making money. But no, I'm taking a little bit of time out of my day to do this podcast. Now, I used to edit my podcast as well. I would sit down, I would write all my notes, figure out what I wanted to do my research and that. Then I would compose everything, make my outline. Then I would record the podcast. Then I would edit the podcast and then publish the podcast. Well, just recently, as of January, I hired Justin. Hey, Justin, how you doing? I hired Justin to edit my podcasts. And I have to tell you that it has freed up a lot of time for me, because yes, I love editing podcasts. I'm good at it. I enjoy doing it, but it's taking time away from my graphic design business. Yes, it is graphic design related. I'm using it kind of for my business. It's my outlet. But the time editing the podcast is time that I could have been doing something else. So as of January, after hiring Justin, I can tell you that time, when I'm done recording today, like right now, when I'm done this podcast, I'm just going to copy the file to my Dropbox, let Justin know that it's there, and then wait for him to send me back the edited file. And it frees up so much time. Now, I already know that as soon as I stop recording this, I know what job, what client work I'm going to get right on and keep working, because that time that I'm going to work on that client work is going to more than pay for what Justin is doing for me. So that's the sort of thing that you can do with a virtual assistant. Now, back in episode 4, way back at the beginning of the podcast, I talked about superhero syndrome. And that's the idea that as designers and as entrepreneurs, we want to tackle everything there is to do with our business. We are actually afraid to delegate work. And you have to break that fear. There are things that you can delegate. And you may start thinking, but nobody can do it as well as I can. Well, that's okay. It doesn't have to be done as well as you can. Sometimes just getting it done is good enough. I mean, this isn't a business related or a design related example, but in my home life here, I'm the one that vacuums the house. It's always been my job. I vacuum the house. My wife will dust, the kids will do other things, but I vacuum. And every once in a while, for some reason, we would get one of the kids to vacuum the house. Now, when I vacuum, I move the sofa, I move the chairs, I move the tables, I get on my hands and knees and vacuum, make sure I get every nook and cranny. When the kids vacuum the house, either my son or my daughter, when they vacuum the house, they'll go around the sofa. They might stick the head of the vacuum underneath the sofa a little bit, but not really look around to see if they got everything. And they go through much quicker. They don't do as good a job as I do. But in the end, the vacuuming was done. Was it done to the level that I normally do it? No. But for that week or whatever period, the vacuuming was done. And you got to start thinking that way mentally. Don't come down with superhero syndrome where you have to do everything because you're afraid other people might not be able to do it to your same level. It doesn't have to be to your level. Sometimes just getting the work done is good enough. Because when you think about it, there's so many things we do when we're running our business. In episode 38, which was titled The Many Hats of a Home-Based Graphic Designer, I went over the many, many things, the many tasks, the many parts of running a graphic design business. So many of them don't have to do with designing itself. And many of those tasks can and should be delegated. Because we know, especially if you are already running your business, because you know there's an awful lot involved with running a successful design business. Way more than simply designing. And if you try to do it all on a consistent basis, I'm not saying you can't do it all, but if you try to do it on a consistent basis year after year, eventually it could lead to burnout. And if it leads to burnout, then where will you be? And one of the simplest answers is hire a virtual assistant. Now, where can you find a virtual assistant? Well, the first thing I'll tell you is before you go and hire a virtual assistant, just see if there's friends and family that can do some of the stuff that I'm telling you that you should be paying for. Sometimes, like when you have kids, I've hired my daughter, I've hired my son when he used to live here. He's at a university now, but when he was here, I would hire them to do small things. Like if it was just data entry or little tasks that weren't actually design-wise, I would often hire them to do it and pay them, a few bucks here or there. And sometimes if it's something as simple as testing out a website, you can get family members to do that. You can get a friend to do that. Just say, hey, I just designed this website. Could you take a few minutes, just run through it, make sure all the links are working, that everything looks okay. Let me know if you see any problems. And sometimes you can do that with friends and family. But oftentimes it's actually better to pay someone for this. So where can you find these people? Well, there's a lot of different places online that you can find virtual assistants. One cheap site is Fiverr. I don't like recommending Fiverr for design stuff, but for some stuff, like you can hire somebody on Fiverr to translate stuff. You can hire somebody on Fiverr to look at a website, to test a website out, see if it's working. You can hire them to just do data entry or that sort of thing. If you want somebody a little bit more, I don't know, Fiverr I find is not overly serious in my opinion. If you want somebody a little bit more serious, you could go to upwork.com, which is a great place to hire something for specific tasks. Or you can go to a company like Virtual Staff Finder, which will help you find a virtual assistant. They're situated in the Philippines, so a lot of times you can find somebody overseas that's cheaper. My virtual assistant is here in Canada, so I pay her the going rate kind of what a virtual assistant is here, or what I presume is the going rate. But a lot of people will hire somebody over like in the Philippines, because for one, the people in the Philippines tend to speak and understand very good English. So there isn't that language barrier, and you can get the work done much, much cheaper over there. So there are places like virtualstafffinder.com that will help you that way. Or there's another one, which is the Global Alliance of Virtual Assistants, which is at globalava.org. And they have an association of virtual assistants worldwide that can help you out. And you just type in what sort of tasks you're looking for, what you need help with, and they will put you in touch with a bunch of people, and you can vet them, you can interview them and figure out who's best. When I hired my virtual assistant, I probably went through 15 or 20. They all sent me their resumes, and I looked at different things, including what they were capable of, where they are, their price, and all sorts of stuff. And I eventually settled on this one woman, and she's been working out. I've been doing some work with her for almost a year now, and I'm enjoying it. But those are just a couple of the places. There's lots of other places. You can even look locally. You can put an ad in your local paper just saying you need somebody. If it's somebody to do phone calls or somebody to do some online research for you, just put an ad in whatever online classified thing and say, listen, I'm willing to pay X amount per hour for somebody to do some online research, and give it a try. You got nothing to lose. And don't forget that when you do hire these people, whether it's a virtual assistant or somebody local or that, this is tax deductible. You get to claim this on your taxes as a business expense. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about this week, is the benefit of hiring a virtual assistant for any sort of thing that you do in your business. All the little mundane tasks to the things you do on a regular basis that really don't bring in income. They don't benefit your business. You're not actually making money while you're doing them. Those tasks should be sent off to somebody else that can do them for you at a much lower rate than what you are earning when you are spending your time on your business designing for clients. So that's today's topic. Now, I would love to hear if you have any experience with virtual assistants. Simply visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 62 and leave me a comment on that page and tell me whether you've considered it before. Have you ever hired a virtual assistant? Do you use them on a regular basis? I would love to hear from you. And now, this week's question of the week. Now, this week is kind of a two-part question, comes in from Sean. And the first part is, he says, if a prospect wants to change your contract, should you be open to it? And the second part is, if a prospect asks you to up-price your quote, in meaning if the prospect asks you to raise the price on your quote, does this mean that they are trying to use your quote to show a competitor for cheaper price? Well, thanks for your questions, Sean. Now, I'll start one at a time. Regarding the contract, when you say that a prospect wants to change your contract, should you be open to making the change? Now, I have to insist that the contract is there to protect both of you. It's not just there to cover your butt. Yes, it is there to cover your butt, but it's also there to protect the client as well. And that's the way you should present it. This is a contract that outlines what they're responsible for, what you're responsible for, and it's to prevent any miscommunication and any fallback should something happen. So it's there to protect both of you. Now, with that said, you will get times where a client will look at a contract and say, oh, can we change something? Or I don't agree with this or whatever. And what I have to say to that is only change the contract if you see there's a benefit to it. Whatever they're asking, if you look at it and you say, well, that sounds like a good idea, then go ahead and change. But don't go along with anything if you don't think it benefits you, or like sometimes you might look at something that benefits the client, but it doesn't harm you. Well, maybe you can go ahead. But if it's something like, the client wants all the files before, like, let's say your contract says that you require payment in full before you transfer the files over. And the client says something, well, you know what? We're going to need 30 days to pay you, but we're going to need all the files beforehand. Well, no, if your contract, that's the way you work, is that, no, you need to be paid before you transfer the files over. That's something you don't change. You tell the client that's just the way you work. So you really have to look at what it is they want to change in the contract. I've had clients come to me before and say, listen, we don't like this, or can we change something on the contract? And again, you look at it. Does it benefit both of you, or does it not? Sometimes it'll benefit the client, but it doesn't harm you. Then maybe you can be up for it. And who knows, maybe it's something that you'd never noticed before, and you can actually change it so that all your future contracts will reflect that. Now, one thing that I will say is never sign a client's contract in lieu of your own. I've had this before where I've issued a contract to a client, and the client goes, oh, well, we have our own contract that we need you to sign. And I'll say, sure, send me your contract. I'll look at it and I'll sign it, but you still have to sign mine. I'm not replacing my contract with yours. But then you have to be really careful and weigh the two contracts to make sure that they don't say opposite things. If they have a contract that states that everything has to be given to them before payment, and yours says that it's after payment, that's a little bit of a conflict. And you may need to get a lawyer involved if that's the case. The only time I've ever had this is when I'm working with government agencies and they need a contract. And mostly the contract is kind of a non-disclosure that I won't use any of the files for somebody else, or that I can't talk about it until the project is over with a non-disclosure agreement and that sort of thing. And those I will gladly sign, but I will never sign a client's contract and not have them sign my own. And when it comes down to it, if the client is not willing to sign your contract, they're not willing to compromise, and they want you to make changes that you're not comfortable with, then walk away. It's not worth it. If they're going to be nitpicky like that, just on the contract bit, then what are they going to be like when the project is actually underway? And it just sounds like they're going to be headaches. So I would just, in that case, I would just walk away. That's only happened to me once where a client really wanted something changed. I'm trying to think. This was years ago. I really don't remember what it was that they wanted changed, but whatever it was, I would not budge. And they said, well, we can't go forward unless you change this because whatever. And I just said, okay, well, we can't work together because I won't change that on the contract. And I wish I could remember what it was, but I can't. Okay, Sean, and now on to the second part of your question, which you asked, if a prospect asks to upprice your quote, does this mean they're trying to use the quote to show a competitor for a cheaper price? Now, this has actually happened to me a few times in the past. And first thing is when they ask you to do this, ask them outright, why do you want me to raise your price? And unless there's a good reason that they give you, don't do it. I mean, most of the time, yes, exactly what you said. The client already knows who they want to work with. Say that they're a company and they have to get 3 quotes in order to, their management or whoever requests them or requires them to get 3 quotes. Well, they already know which designer they want to work with. So they might ask you to raise your price up a little bit so that they can get that other designer as the lowest bid and work with them. And if they're upfront with you, then just say no. You're not going to do that to accommodate them so that the work can go elsewhere. Just don't submit another quote if it comes to that. And who knows, you might end up getting the job, or they might just throw your quote out and go get a quote somewhere else, that's somebody that will do it for a higher price so that they don't get the job. Now, that's happened to me a few times in the past, and that's exactly what I did. I would ask them, and sometimes they would just say, well, we need it to be a higher price or whatever. And if they don't give you a good enough answer, then just say, like, no, that's the price. If you're not happy with my price, you can find somebody else, but that's the price that I'm charging for the job. Now, with that said, there is a legitimate reason for somebody to ask for you to raise their price. And this has happened to me a number of times, especially when you're working for any sort of, say, like government agencies or certain things where there might be grants involved. And I had a company that I was working for that would apply for a lot of grants for different parts of their business. And sometimes what they would say is, in order for us to get a grant, the price has to be at least whatever certain amount. So they would tell me, like, say I would quote something and I would come in at, $4,200. Well, they would come back to me and say, Mark, can you raise your price up to $5,000 or a little bit over $5,000? We're applying for a grant, and the grant only applies if the job is over $5,000. In which case, I will raise my price. I would just say, well, what do you want the price to be? And they would say, well, put it at $5,100. And that would be the price I would charge them. It was a case where if I didn't raise my price, they wouldn't get any money at all and the job wouldn't go forth. So I actually make more money on the project. And as I said, this has happened to me several times where I've made more money on the project just so the client can get the grant. Other times what will happen is the client, especially if this is towards the end of the grant period and it's an annual grant, sometimes what will happen is when a company gets a grant, say they get a grant for $20,000 to do all this different work in a certain sector or whatever, they get $20,000. Well, if they don't end up spending the $20,000, they only spend, say, $15,000. Well, it's possible that next year when the grants are given out, whoever is issuing the grants will say, well, that company, we gave them 20 last year and they only ended up using 15, because they have to legitimize and say what they did with the money. Well, if they say, well, they only use 15, well, this year we'll give them 15,000 only. And sometimes, so what'll happen is I have another client that towards the end of the year, they'll come up to me and they'll say, Mark, we have an extra $5,000 or $2,000. Sometimes it might only be $500 that we need to spend before the end of the year or before the end of the grant period or whatever the time frame. Can we do something? Can we do something for that price? What can we do? Can you design some stuff for us? Can maybe we get some printed material or whatever? And we'll figure something out for them just so that they can spend the money. And there's been times where they say, well, we want some brochures. We do it all up. And they say, according to the grant, so much of it can be spent on design and so much on printed material. So we'll get a quote on the printed material. And that's pretty easy. We just say, okay, well, we have $5,000. How many flyers can we get for $5,000? It's a little bit backwards doing it, but that's happened to me many times where somebody will say, this is the amount of money we had. How much can we get for it? And I'll say, okay, well, for that much, we can get whatever, 7,000 flyers, 15,000 flyers or whatever for that price. But when it comes to the design, they might have a separate part of the grant, which is for design. And maybe they allot, as I said, $5,000. And I was going to charge $4,000. And they'll say, Mark, can you invoice us for $5,000? And it's a very legitimate reason. I mean, it's kind of gaming the system, but we benefit from our end. So I just want to let you know that whenever somebody says, can you raise your quote? There might be a reason like that. So simply ask them. And the last thing I want to mention is there's always the possibility that they want you to up your quote because they are anticipating that there's going to be more than what was originally scoped in the job. In which case, sometimes they should tell you, but I know from experience, sometimes they don't. Like sometimes they'll get an idea, like say, somebody you were quoting a job for a 24-page booklet and everything's going through. And then all of a sudden they realize at their end that maybe 24 pages is not enough. Maybe it'll be a 28 or a 32-page booklet. But right now they need to get a quote on 24-page booklet. They will sometimes say, okay, can you raise your price up? And the reason you're raising the price up is because later when the project actually comes through and they need the 32-page, they might need for you to cover that in your original quote as opposed to re-quoting for a 32-page book. Now, that's a little bit weird and strange when that happens, but I have seen that happen in the past before. Mostly when I was working at the printing company, that people would come in with that sort of thing and ask for certain prices. So anyways, I don't know if that answers your questions, Sean, but very interesting. I'd be really curious to know why you're posing these questions, if these are things that were happening to you. But yeah, when it comes to contracts and pricing, I mean, there's some really strange things that people will ask for, and you just have to kind of stick to your guns and decide whether or not it's worth agreeing to their demands or holding true to what you are usually do and the way you normally run your business. And depending on what the circumstances are, it can go either way. Sometimes you just stick to your guns, and sometimes you agree and you make the changes whichever way they see fit. But every situation will be unique. Anyways, thanks a lot for that, Sean. Now, if you have a question you'd like me to answer in a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and submit your question. I would love to answer it. Now, before I go, I want to share a beautiful 5-star review I got on iTunes from Ricky G. Butts in the USA. This is great for all designers. I've been listening to Mark DeCote's Resourceful Designer podcast for months now, and I am never let down. As a designer that has graduated from a home-based business to owning a firm, I have dealt with many of the same situations he speaks of, but handled many different, not necessarily better, ways. As business owners, we learn from our mistakes more than any other way. Mark puts himself out there so that others can learn from his mistakes. That is invaluable for a home-based business as well as a firm. For that, thank you, Mark. Well, thank you for that, Ricky. I appreciate that. Always love getting these iTunes reviews. And if you would like to leave one for me, simply visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, which will redirect you to the iTunes store in your country where you can leave a review for the podcast. And finally, I want to remind you of my tip of the week, which is simply include contact information on any coming soon, under construction or undergoing maintenance or any such page like that on a website. Put on the contact information and maybe a brief description of what the company is, just in case somebody happens to stumble on the site while it's down. So that's it for Resourceful Designer this week. I would love it if you shared the podcast with a fellow designer. If you know anybody that, whether they're running their own business or maybe they're thinking about it, or maybe they're still in school studying graphic design, if you think they can benefit from this podcast, please share it with them. resourcefuldesigner.com www.proofreading.com/subscribe, which has all the links for all the different platforms you can subscribe to the podcast on. So until next week, I wish you all the best in your graphic design business. I am Mark Decote, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.